Hey all, welcome to TAOTalks. I'm Smith and I'm so glad that you're here. TAOTalks is about a series of philosophical conversations about exploration of life, thought, and meaning. What you can expect from this channel is in the year of 2025, we're calling this the first season, a series of episodes. There will be 10 episodes launched every single month in the first week of the month. So the long episodes will be published here on this channel as well as on any of the platforms that you listen to podcasts from. We will also have smaller clips. So if you don't have time and if you want to just dive into or digest smaller portions of our content, then you can also do that right here on this channel. My intention with the TAOTalks is to share my journey and the things that I'm learning, especially around the ways of being. The other intention that I have with TAOTalks is to build a community with people like you and I so that we get to enjoy and learn from each other. I'm glad that you're here, and in today's conversations, we will be talking about life as an experience. We will also be talking about our relationship to pain and 5 different dimensions of ways of being or of ourselves. So I hope that you enjoy these conversations. Thank you. Hi, Jesse.
Respect.
How do you feel?
It depends on which part you're talking about feeling. Feel good here. I got some pain, shoulder, neck, discomfort. Feeling a little bit more in the moment, but other than that, I feel good. I'm glad to be here.
Very nice. Very nice. I feel jitters of excitement. Yeah. It's incredible to think about time. I think we talked about this because the last time we did this meditation, we talked about it where it's like a couple of minutes can feel like hours. And so I set a timer for 5 minutes. That was long gone. And then with my eyes open, I was meditating, and it felt like that was 5 minutes, actually felt like 1 minute. And then we were meditating for like a longer period of time. So very interesting.
Yeah.
And while with my eyes open, I could actually, I realized this in that moment that one of my favorite things about meditation is, for me personally, being able to just feel and hear my heart rate. That's one of my favorite things. And I realized that because I could really feel that even with my eyes open.
It reminded me of times of sitting in Joshua Tree on meditation retreats.
Mm-hmm.
Meditation retreat's not really the accurate term for it, but on retreat in which meditation was a part of the practice.
Yeah.
And sometimes meditation would be 45 minutes, hour, longer. And you never knew. Could be 5 minutes, could be short, could be long. You didn't know going into it.
They wouldn't tell.
Yeah, well,
it's like we're going to meditate.
Start every session off with a meditation in this way.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how the time part, sometimes the hour felt like short.
Yeah.
Come out of it and you're like, you felt like you went through a wormhole and you got out on the other side.
Yeah.
And sometimes 5 minutes felt like hours, like painstaking hours.
Right.
So difficult to get through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. Man, welcome to TAOTalks.
Thank you. Yeah.
This is kind of crazy. Like, to see us in the space. I mean, I've been thinking about this for a while. And then after even talking with you about it recently, I've been imagining all of this, and it's kind of surreal that we're here. So I just want to cherish this moment and just say welcome. I think it was probably like more than a year ago that I started coming to see you before that. So it was just moment practice. And I'm like, man, like podcasts, like we should do podcasts or books, and from that point of view, like this is a timestamp on manifesting one of them. And then I also want to just say that the other part, the book too, like I'm manifesting that it's going to happen. So that's powerful. I have I think one of my first questions that I want to ask you is, what does this mean to you? The Tao Talks. What does this mean to you, and why is it important?
Meaning is a deep question. Like there's a lot to that word. Superficially, it doesn't mean a whole lot. If I'm being honest, this terrifies me. I don't know what will come out of it, which is one of the most terrifying places to be, right? Like what comes next is usually what we fear the most.
Yeah.
But meaning, to do things that have that have meaning to them, that feel purposeful. I feel very strong about that word in relationship to this. It was something that I've sensed, felt, heard in guidance that this was a path that I would be on. So in a way, this feels familiar, but this is also not the thing that I would pursue on my own.
Yeah.
So, what does it mean to me? It means an exploration, I guess, exploration of truth, of meaning. What is that word? I think there's a lot of that we get to explore in here. Some excitement, right? What comes out of this has the potential to blossom into things that we wouldn't necessarily expect.
Yeah.
Like planting a seed, and you don't always know what that seed's going to bloom into. And there's some excitement with that.
Yeah, I think I like thinking about this as an experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Because experiments, you can have an hypothesis, but you can't know exactly what the outcome is going to be. And then things shapeshift after that first experiment. I also think while we do talk about exploration of concepts like meaning and thoughts, and I think also we could just keep it light or fun too, because I think what I'm learning more and more is that, at least my personality is I tend to take things very seriously all the time, and it has gotten me very far in life, but it is also the very thing that can hold me back from many things. And so I think keeping it playful and fun is what I think of it. And I think one of the things I actually wrote down in my journal Monday morning in reflection to this was not going for perfection and letting rawness blossom more. And we're talking about seed planting and things like that, because the rawness is actually perfect. And so treating this as like that the first draft is the final draft, and there's no like need to perfect things. There's no need to architect things, because one of the best things that you often say in our sessions is that if it's important, it's going to come up. And so I think it's awesome to be able to like trust that.
I too take myself seriously. I had a habit of that and a history of that. And it's one of my reflections that I get to remind myself of often is to take the work seriously, but don't take yourself so seriously.
Mm-hmm.
We are inherently messy creatures as humans. So there's a level in which we have to be okay with things being messy. Like it's not going to be perfect. And the more that we can be okay being messy, the more we get to enjoy the mess of things at times. The part of serious and taking things seriously and then not so seriously makes me think of like grip. You know, when we're doing work, if you got a tool, you gotta hold that tool pretty tight, right? Because you don't want to let that tool get out of hand. It can make a big mess of things. So when we're doing work, gotta hold pretty tight. But there's a point where we can hold it so tight that we actually get too rigid, and we can create just as much of a mess by being too tight with it as we are with being too loose. And there's a point where we have to let go a little bit.
There's a dance.
There's a dance.
Yeah.
And there's other times where we just have to let go completely. Kind of brings up the metaphor of the roller coaster a little bit as well.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
The more you hold on to the roller coaster, the more it's going to take you for a ride. And there's points where you just have to let go, throw your hands up, and enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think TAOTalks, just this for me is like also about documenting the journey, a journey. But it, oftentimes I do think about it from my journey point of view, but it's a journey. And something that I came across very recently was about the definition of design. So, I'm a scientist, and then I'm like, oh, I want to be a designer from a point of view of like, designing furniture or like things like that. And then I learned about this definition of design. It comes from a literal, it comes from an old Danish term called formgivning.
Say that again?
Formgivning, which literally translates to form giving. And this person talked about that form giving can then mean that you're giving a form to something that does not exist yet. Expanding more on that is that you're giving a form to the future. You're giving a form to something that you see yourself living in. And so then by definition, design is in a way formulating a future that you'd like to see yourself living in. And the author said, or like the speaker that I learned this from, said that by looking at design from that point of view, it kind of liberates design from designing like from a fashion point of view or hype beast, that kind of things. And I took away with that where I want to see myself moving better in the future. I want to see myself living to my fullest potential, being well with my relationships and things like that. So that's the future that I see myself living in. And so that's the very thing that I'm designing for right now. And this thing is a documentation, really, of that.
I like that. I like I like the definition of design. What comes up for me with that is the ways of being. We're born into this world, and we have a way of being. And when we're young and we're immature, we are not aware of that way of being. There's a design already inherent, but we have not actually taken hold of that design, made it our own. It's usually somebody else's that we are modeling, mimicking. And those ways of beings don't always work. They may serve us in some ways and not serve us in other ways.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we learn about ourselves, get in touch with ourselves, discover who we are, we get to explore the ways of being that we currently are. And we get to think about the ways of being that we could be, how those ways could change. And we can change them in our daily actions, because our daily actions are our way of being. And as we take, that, if we think of that as the work, as we take that part seriously, we can quite literally design a completely different life experience from the one we were born with a number of infinite potentials, because where you can design, I think the one thing I would change in that definition is, you said something like something doesn't have form and we bring it into form. I would say there's already form. There's already matter here. So matter already has a form. We're just changing the shape of that form.
Right. We're shaping it.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
So that's all we're doing with ways of being. We can shape our ways of being into a different way of being.
Mm-hmm.
And that the outcomes of that, the potential experiences that we get to live with that way of being compared to the ones that may not serve us, can be a complete shift in the life experience that we have. One in which we're experiencing a lot of pain and suffering versus something in which we're never going to be devoid of pain and we're never going to be devoid of suffering, but considerably less. And there's a lot more meaning and purpose.
Yeah. Fulfillment.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I would in that say that your definition of design and my definition of way of being are synonymous.
Right. So do you think that then a lifetime is it's just an addition of us just chiseling away at these forms that already exist, and we're shaping it to how we how we see that shape being at the end of the life or something? Like it's what are we doing in this lifetime, right? In a way.
I think life is just simply an experience. Chiseling is happening, whether we're the ones chiseling or somebody, or we're the ones being chiseled, is always in question. I have not found much an explanation of life that feels adequate, other than it's just an opportunity for an experience. If you think about life too hardly, too much, it can be very meaningless. It's very easy to get to like a nihilistic state, because what's the point? 1 billion years from now, I won't be here and humans may not be here. What was the point of it all? Why did life exist? At some point, the universe is going to either continue to expand to the point where it doesn't hold life, or it's going to come back into contraction, in which all of life that's happened up to this point will be gone and destroyed. So what's the meaning of that? Like I don't want to get wrapped up too much into that. I do think that it's an opportunity for an experience.
That's actually, the first time you said that, it was kind of a cognitive dissonance for me. Like life is an experience, or it's just an experience.
There's a few Alan Watts videos that are on YouTube, and there's one in which he describes the earth like an apple tree. And if you look at an apple tree it produces apples. And you can look at the earth, and the earth produces humans. It fruits, humans.
Mm-hmm.
So I think of the human experience as a universe, the universe having a human experience. The universe has a lot of different experiences. It has the experience of the Big Bang and expansion. It has the experience of contraction. It has the experience of a tree or a plant or a dog or a rock. And it has the experience of human. And we are all contributing to that human experience. So we are simply an opportunity for the human experience. It's part of what the universe is experiencing. So it's something that's bigger than us.
Mm-hmm.
What it is, again, I don't know. It's very easy to get in there and it can feel meaningless and purposeless very, very quickly. But the fact that we're here, the fact that we are here without consent, wasn't asked to be here. We are here put in bodies that we don't really have any control over.
Mm-hmm.
And there's differences between us. So, some people are born with more abled bodies and some are born with less abled bodies, but yet we all have an experience.
Yeah.
And I think there's some meaning in that experience. Just the fact that we get to have it means something. Again, I kind of quickly move off of that because I feel like it's a pretty dark hole that it can get. You can get a rabbit hole that doesn't really bring out a whole lot.
You're talking about human experience. Do you think that there is a manual for that? Like the universe is like there, not in a form of something that we can read or write in a tangible way, but really like, I think we talk about these like universal laws or something, but do you think there's something to do with like manuals of how to operate like human experience?
I think I'd say yes. I'd say that there's manuals in the same way that, you get a new computer and there's a manual to it, right? Does the manual make the computer work?
Right.
Or is it just a helpful guide to understand how the computer works?
But then you
more you utilize the manual, the more seamless the computer. You may not actually know how the computer works.
Yeah.
The manual is not going to give you that deep knowing, but it gives you some basic guidelines.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely those kind of things. I think periodic table. The what we know and understand of atoms and electrons and matter and basic physics, the things we know about neurology and biochemistry and those are all kind of they're manuals. You can read the manuals and you don't necessarily know how the thing works, but you have a better understanding and some guidelines of how to get the most out of it.
But at some point, the manual is as good as the manual for a computer, where we could have an opportunity to go further with just you and the computer versus you, computer, and the manual, because the manual is not going to possibly have infinite things that a computer could do.
The manual is not going to tell you everything.
Yeah.
And so if you get stuck on the we humans like to do this, the manual, how many books?
Yeah, I'm going to master this. Memorize this.
Becomes this is the rule.
Yeah.
And it's there's a lot more that's not written than that is written.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it can be become just as much of a crutch as it can be a crutch that helps us when we're hobbled versus a crutch that holds us back when we're healed.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good way to put it, for sure. We haven't talked a whole lot about what we will talk about here. Is there something specific that just comes for you that's this is a vision that I see that fits well with the format here? Like a topic or ideology or I don't know.
I think
Or a fun game. I don't know.
I think where you started it with design and ways of being is pretty good. I think there's a lot of different tangents that we can work off with that, because there's a lot of different aspects to who we are and how we're designed. One of the things I talk about frequently, I've talked about with you, and I bring this up with clients on a regular basis, is understanding that we are multidimensional beings. We're physical. We have a physical aspect. We have a mental just being kind of like the processor size of your computer, right? Just it's kind of what its potential capabilities are. Then we have intellectual, which is kind of how you use that processor to build and create off of.
Yeah.
Then we have our emotional system, and then the spiritual system part of us. And we're definitely spiritual beings. And I don't mean spiritual in a religious sense. I don't mean spiritual in some kind of, godly sense, but spiritual being where we are connected to something that is bigger than us, whether there's evidence of that something or not.
Yeah. So there's something else happening here bigger than us.
And all humans seem to be connected to that concept, even if that concept isn't real.
Yeah.
And I would say this, and these dimensions are hierarchical. Our physical is our base layer that we literally plug into the world. It's our neurology, our skin, our body, how we sense and perceive the world, how we interact in it. And that's at the base layer. Mental, intellectual are still in the lower levels. Emotional is a higher level hierarchy, because your emotions can flood and distort what is true and real in the world.
Mm-hmm. All the time.
Yeah. Well, they do all the time.
Yeah.
That's part of the things. We don't really know what is true. We don't really know what is real. That is always going to be the case. And then that spiritual is the highest one. And because these are hierarchies, where we start, I would say, is physical is generally the better place to start, because the spiritual is literally a bypass. People like to go to the spiritual without working up from the bottom up, which is really where the most amount of work can be done. So there's a lot of things you talk about in there.
So real quick, this is where the TAOFit method is what you work on, is where you want to have an entry point for people to access this hierarchy at a foundational level.
Correct.
Something that's foundational, but not in a sense like these are the fundamentals or whatever. It's also at the same time, it actually happens to be something that's the easiest to get involved in, I guess.
It's the owner's manual.
Yeah.
Right? How does this body work?
Yeah.
And how do I learn how to use all the aspects of this body, and so I can get the most value out of it possible?
Yeah. Oftentimes the aha moments in those are like, we have a pain, we do certain things, we will do like a femoral or a TFL. It's like, whoa, like this range of motion has just increased now. And there is that aha moment of the manual. There is a guidance to this, and then you get to learn. There is like, in a way, outcome from input, output.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so then you were saying...
Well, and an even bigger part of that is just, accessing your breathing, right? To get on the foam roller, you got to be able to take good, nice big breaths, be able to exhale, be able to melt. Melt is a neurological...
That is a complicated thing, though, I must say. The whole thing to talk about breath, it's like, I feel like I've been doing the movement with you for like 2 years now. And like only recently I'm able to actually like really experience it. I spent a lot of time in just that, this thing that I was talking about of like pain here, first recognize, like, whoa, I'm in pain. There's here, right? And then we do some sort of an introspection, or we like do something about that, and then you get to be like, oh, it's a little bit better, or it's more balanced. I just spent so much time on that. And then we're getting to breathing. And then I know you talk about how that relates to other layers of the hierarchy too, but yeah.
Yes, in huge ways. One of the benefits of starting at the physical level is your breath exists in the physical level. It also exists in all the others. So let me get into the hierarchy a little bit more, because I didn't say that fully. This would probably be a good place to kind of talk about that. So hierarchies of dimensions of being of human: physical, mental, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual. They're all the same being. So it's one of the things I love about this concept is the language of movement around this is the same, whether you're talking about the physical level or up to the spiritual level. If you are stuck, rigid, inflexible, in pain at the physical level, that is going to be showing up in all the other levels, including the spiritual level. The hardest place to get change from that physical, the hardest place to get that change is if we address it at the spiritual. Partly because we bypass, and humans are just natural bypassers. It doesn't mean we're bad people. It just means that that's not going to be the place that we're going to get the most change. It doesn't work from the top down. It works from the bottom up. If we address
that, is that because it's complicated? Like, what do you mean by because we just bypass? What do you think we're doing that we just bypass? We're not really understanding the depth of it or something?
It's because the emotional is in between, right? So we have the physical, and the emotional is interacts with the physical. So when we don't address the physical first and work our way up through the emotional to get to the spiritual, the emotional becomes the bypass because we're not aware of what's going on emotionally. And what we're not aware of emotionally, our egos will use to manipulate us into thinking that we're doing spiritual things, when the reality is we're not actually doing it. We're not actually doing the work. Namaste. Great. Yeah. God is great. Being here, but it's in we're ungrounded because we're trying to address it up here in this area, and we haven't actually grounded it into the physical.
You can feel empty. Like if I'm a beginner and I go to a practice or a class or something, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to do this, I could literally feel empty in a sense that I have no idea what these people are talking. Like, what are they talking about, or the experiences of that?
I mean, I think that it's just simply ungrounded. And ungrounded is if I plant a seed and I don't plant it deep enough in the ground, it might sprout, but it won't have good roots. It won't be grounded. It's going to be more likely to perish. It's going to wither. It's going to be weak. It's not going to have a lot of strength to it.
Yeah.
When we address things on the physical, so if I'm in pain spiritually, I'm also in pain physically. And the way that we address pain is we have to start with our breath, and our breath is connected to our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. So, states of fight or flight versus rest and restore. That's a big part of our emotional system. And so by working on breath, we get to tune into how we're breathing, how we're feeling, and we develop a deeper sensitivity to ourselves. And then we get to see what are the emotions that are there. I'm in physical pain. Am I also in emotional pain? Is there anger there? Is there loneliness? Do I feel unworthy? Is there victimhood? Do I have a story going on around these things? And if I do, then that gives me an opportunity to take some deep breaths, and work with that. And this would be like a whole deep dive conversation talking about just that part, just the
Yeah.
emotional stuff.
Yeah.
But it starts with the physical, like the physical of who am I? How do I operate? This is part of the reason why it's slow. Like you saying, it was a 1 to 2 year process just to even get to this next. It's a slow process.
Mm-hmm.
It does not happen fast. It took me years.
Yeah.
Probably, I'd say 8 to 10 years before I really got to a point where I was able to graduate from being a novice to a little bit not so much of a novice, right? Like still light years away from being any kind of mastery in it. But, it took a long time. It takes a long time to just know who we are at the physical level. And part of that knowing of what we are at the physical level is automatically manifesting differently throughout. Because again, the language of movement's the same all the way up. So if I'm seeing that I'm physically rigid, physically inflexible, physically in pain, and I start taking time to work on that, learning how my body works, learning how to move differently, learning how to breathe differently. As I feel better physically, I'm also going to see those changes in the rest of the hierarchy without ever even addressing the rest of the hierarchy. So in doing so, we get some knowing of the rest of the hierarchy. It's like, oh, I can see my emotions. I can see how they come up around either my physical body, my mental, intellectual, because all of those things are going to end up being present. They're going to get put on the table in front of us, and we're going to have no choice but to look at it. It's also the slowest. It's the hardest. It's the work.
Yeah. The language that you were talking about, specifically, you said the language of movement at a physical level is the same as the language on other hierarchies. Do you think that those language you're talking about from a point of view of like experience that we may have, or the curiosity that we may have for just diving more in? Like, is that what you mean by language? So like if language is English, Spanish, whatever, like here you're talking about languages of like curiosity or experiences, whether it be like, I just feel really good. You've kind of transcended away from just the physical level to partially into like a mental or even emotional well-being of like feeling good, or it could be completely different where you could feel sadness, anger, things like that. You could feel that, I think.
Well, I mean, so we feel those things. We're not always in touch with feeling those things. Yeah. So it might be a matter of like being in touch with feeling those things.
Yes.
There's something at the very beginning of what you said that triggered something, and I feel like I lost it. Can you rephrase it? Can we try re-asking the question?
Yeah, I think we were talking about the language at the physical level is the same as the language at the other hierarchical level, and I was wondering if you're talking about this language from a point of view of curiosity or experiences.
I think curiosity is important. Definitely helpful. Yeah, there's something else that was there that came up, and I'm trying. It's like I feel like it's so close, so I'm going to see if it can come back up. Oh, there's something around good. Feeling
good. Yeah.
So I'm wary of those kind of words that have implied judgment, like the idea of feeling good versus feeling bad. Because no matter how good you are at doing your work, there's no guarantee that you are going to feel good, right? Like feeling good it's like a sunset, like experiencing a sunset. It's a moment in time, and it's fleeting. It's going to be gone very quickly. So the idea that good is a permanent state that we get to.
Oh, okay. It's fleeting moment, but you could still be like, I think you can say that if I do a movement practice for a half hour, 45 minutes, you could say that the outcome at the end of that could be that you feel balanced or little less pain or things like that, right? Now, it's another thing. It's like, I'm fixed. It's cured. That's a different story, right?
Yeah, I don't know if I can say that. There's sometimes the movement is a big gray area. There's times where you go in with the best intentions to feel better and you end up feeling worse. You do a little bit too much. You do it in the wrong way. You tweak something. It's like, oh, like I went in with the right intentions, but now I actually feel worse. So the outcome of good is not my goal.
Mm.
So the way I talk about this is, pain is universal. All humans experience it.
Always.
And all humans experience it all the time.
Right.
Pain is a kind of a constant. There's always some level, like life, universe put bark on trees and it made rock. Like there's things that are going to take skin off and draw blood. Like that's just daily. So the goal is not to get to a point of being pain-free. The goal is not to get to a point of good or happy or this idea of like a beautiful sunset that lasts forever. For me, it's more a matter of changing our relationship with pain. That pain is a constant for a reason. It is a form of communication of universal communication. And it's a guide. It allows us to we can use pain to maneuver and navigate through the world. So,
maybe a language.
What's that?
Maybe it's a language.
It is a language. Yeah. And so the relationship we have with pain will dictate a tremendous amount. People who have a victim language with pain, will add suffering on top of their pain. So they're going to have the pain that's always going to, you can't avoid. And then they're adding suffering on top of it because everything turns into a story of why me? And, this is always happening. And
the world is against me.
Right. The world is against me. And it's like, now I'm adding suffering to my pain. So my
pain is constant again in this,
right.
So her, him, or someone who's like not referring to the pain as that. Pain is a constant.
No.
It's just a relationship to it or perspective of it.
Right. So I never don't guarantee, I don't make promises of pain free. I don't make promises that this is going to help you feel better. Because sometimes you can feel worse. But in the process of doing the work and changing your relationship with pain, changing your relationship with your body, changing your relationship with all these dimensions of yourself, my experience is, even if moment to moment, on any given day, you might feel worse versus you might feel better. Over time, that change in relationship with pain will feel significantly different in general compared to having the victim story. If we're able to kind of like prune those stories off and have a different relationship with that pain, then we have a different experience in life. Doesn't mean that it's pain-free. Doesn't mean it's always good, right? You're going to have hardship. And if we are doing things for the purpose of feeling good, then we're going to avoid things that are hard. And sometimes it's the hard things that are good. And so if we're avoiding hard things, then we're not going to actually experience the good. So, I don't want to be focused on good because sometimes to get there, I got to do some hard stuff. And the older I get, the more I realize that only continues to increase, as we get older. Especially, if you're a parent, and they're like, the
world is against you.
The roles and responsibilities that you have and the amount of time that is being drawn upon you for other people and not for yourself just grows and grows. It's hard. It becomes a hardship. And if we have this story, this, victim story of our pain, that hardship is going to be a tremendous suffering as we get older. And it's going to be like, and what's the meaning and purpose of that? How do we find meaning and purpose when we're living this life based on a victim story in which it just feels, and because it's hard and I'm always seeking good, I'm not willing to do the hard work that will get me out of it. So, I love hard. Like hard is one of my favorite things. It helps that I'm a little bit of a masochist. I've never really, I don't like pain, but there are some pains that I find somewhat enjoyable.
Pleasure, yeah.
Being an athlete has helped with that, because you cannot be an athlete without your muscles burning, right? Without working hard and feeling it. And sometimes going out and competing and getting banged up and being at the end of the day, you're like, oh, that was amazing. It's weird, but that's a true thing. And so that's something that's served me and helped me. It's also hurt me because I've thrown myself over things that have led to some serious injuries and some extra pain. But usually when I look back, the reasons that I went over the handlebars or did something dumb and stupid that really created some serious damage, it was because I was experiencing life based on a bad story. That, had I had a different relationship with my stories at that time, it probably wouldn't have happened.
So I think in the beginning we talked about life is experience. And now I'm thinking, to add to that, pain is also experience. It is part of the experience.
I think that pain is the most beautiful part of the experience. When I look at the history of humans from what we have, the things that we celebrate, the things that we honor, the things that we find immense beauty from, tend to come from some serious pain and suffering. If you look at art, you look at music, the people who produced those things in which universally humans are drawn to, because it resonates something deeply within us. Pain is the universal language that we all know, and so it resonates within all of us. It's the thing that ties us all together. And the better the relationship that we have with pain, whether we like it or not. It's not something we have to like, right? We don't have to like it. But if we have a good relationship with it, or a productive, a meaningful relationship with it, I would probably come up with better terms for that.
Yeah, it's an awareness. I mean, really, we're talking about awareness.
Having an awareness.
Yeah.
That becomes a place in which we develop empathy. And empathy is a way of connecting neurologically with another human being. And it's not there's a difference. People get empathy confused with sympathy all the time. Like, empathy is a deep knowing. I understand your pain because I had it too. And that's a place in which all humans, no matter where they come from, no matter what they look like, no matter what their differences have in common, and can find common ground in.
What's coming up for me right now is the movement practice, which we haven't talked a lot about here, but for the last 2 years, I've done the movement practice to be pain-free. I'll just say it out there. And so, like, you talk about the rule of you're either in pain or not in pain. And I think I talked to you just recently about how I'm like, well, this thing about pain is a zero, or like I'm not in pain. I'm finding out after 2 years that doesn't exist, where even at some point I'm at 0.2% pain or whatever. Maybe I didn't feel in pain before because I wasn't aware of that. But it turns out that I'm always in pain. And I think that beautifully articulates what we were talking about here, from what I experienced at the physical level of the hierarchy. I think I want to explore the languages that are common between different hierarchies. Like, we were talking about curiosity and things like that. We took the branch of pain from that point of view. I think pain is a common language there, for sure. I think we can say that. But I think I talked about experiences and curiosity. I wonder what you think about that.
Experiences and curiosity is two separate things, or
Yes and no. Yeah.
okay. I do find I think curiosity is an important point. Curiosity is very human, but even with humans, there's a spectrum from those who are less curious and those who are more curious.
Yeah.
When it comes to the work specific that I teach, I find curiosity seems to be an important ingredient. People who are not curious,
Yeah, we'll think of. Yeah.
they just tend to stay in the same place,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's not a judge. I don't want to say that in a way that has a judgment, because I don't want to pretend that my way of being is a better way of being than any other way of being. It's just my way of being. It's what works for me. And what I want to teach is not to teach other people my way of being. I want to give them the manual,
Mm-hmm.
so that they can understand
For
and can
themselves.
develop their own way of being off of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just tools, just guides. It's a guideline. It's not necessarily the way. So in the way that in that and what I teach, like curiosity is integral. And then, there's other ways of being that aren't going to have curiosity, but that doesn't mean that they're less in any way. Because there's other ways of being that the universe is experiencing as well.
That's actually really helpful for me, because I tend to have judgment, like that quality in me. And I think that comes from thinking oftentimes that my way, or a particular way that I am gravitated towards, like, is the way of living. Like, and why else would you live your life alternatively? To hear you say that, and it's not you saying that, it's happening. The universe also has other experiences that other people gravitate towards and things like that. Like, it's yes and yes. Like, this is true and this is true. It's just perspective from which you're looking at, or who's involved in it, perhaps.
So I get the metaphor. I like metaphors. So chemistry, and I want to think of like order and chaos, and that being a spectrum. And I want to use H2O as an example. So the more heat, the more chaos, right? The more everything's in disorder. And the more cold, the more ordered.
Yeah.
So there's all these different ways of being, which is more chaotic. If you look at the universe at its core, that is what the universe is. It's expanding and it's contracting at the same time, right? Expanding being chaotic and contracting being order. It's trying to bring things into order while things are trying to move into disorder. And that is taking place with all things at all times.
Tensegrity.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So my way of being versus an infinite potential of ways of being. If everybody, so I have judgments too, right? If everybody did it my way,
Mm-hmm.
the world would be a different place,
Mm.
right? Like I have that thought all the time.
Mm-hmm.
If everybody did it my way, there'd be no war, there'd be peace, there'd be no.
Yeah.
But the reality is that's not true. The reality is that if everybody did it my way, that would be taking things from chaos and bringing it into order. And it would be it'd be an ice block. There's no life in that much order. It would all life would cease to be if things were done. Everybody did it exactly my way.
Mm-hmm.
So that doesn't feel like a logical reality. It's not supposed to be everybody doing it my way.
Right.
Which means
There has to be a spectrum.
there has to be a spectrum, which
Yeah.
means that my way is not the right way. My way is not the wrong way. It's just my way. That's just all it is. And if my way is, if I do it well, and if my way is a way that is helpful for others, then they will see that, and they will follow that way themselves, and for themselves, discover it for themselves. I talk about this sometimes. I don't know if I've said it with you. Like when I teach movement, like my assessment has some rigidity to it.
Mm-hmm.
I want people to get into a specific position to start with.
Yeah.
And because we're exploring very specific things. And so I talk about that in terms of, I teach right angles, because right angles is our starting point where we all know we're starting at the same place.
Mm-hmm.
But then the goal that I give people is like, what you need to do is start to smooth off the edges of that angle. Those angles, start to turn those right angles more into circles, bring it into flow. Discover what it is for you. Because the way I move my body is not the way that you move your body. So if you're trying to do it my way, you're going to find that you're not going to be able to do it because you don't have the same body. So, I can show you a starting point and I can show you how to start navigating, but ultimately you have to smooth it out and figure out what it is for you.
Something that's important and crucial for what you teach is this notion of, I think you want to give frameworks, you want to give foundations so that someone else can be the experts in themselves, right? And so you start with the foundations, but then eventually you migrate yourself towards something that is an exploration, an infinite exploration within yourself that's actually singular also. Yeah.
Being an expert, I think I like that word when it comes to ourselves. Because there is nobody else that can be more of an expert than we can be with ourselves, and nobody else experiences us the way we do. And so the more that we, do the work at that physical level to know ourselves and be the expert, makes us, it means that, when we go into that doctor's office, we can recognize that doctor might be an expert in their field, but they're not an expert on us. And so we can listen to them and be open to what they have to say, but at the same time, not be manipulated. Not that they're trying to manipulate us, but we tend to, if we're not an expert, we're just easily manipulated to go down rabbit holes that may not be what we
true
need.
For us.
Yeah. And so becoming an expert of yourself, like that, I think that, to know oneself, to know thyself is, it's one of the oldest questions in philosophy. Who am I? Why am I here? What am I here for? Those are all questions that are leaning to me. What is the meaning and purpose of my life?
I think that, and now like the example of the doctor's office, I think that works really well at other hierarchical levels too, because then you could be in an example where if you are aware and if you are in tune with, let's say, your emotional well-being, then it becomes effective. I wanted to say easier, but it becomes effective for you to not let other people tell you where your emotional well-being is. And so that's just an example of how the parallelism between this physical hierarchy of the doctor's office and whatever your experiences are, and that's a singular experience. At the same time, in an emotional layer, that parallelism occurs. It can.
Yeah, we can use the example of your spouse. You live in close proximity with other people. We tend to project onto other people. We have our stories we project onto them. It's like, you're being this way, which is a really normal human thing to say to somebody. You're being this way to me. Well, am I? If I check in, like, that's not how I'm being. And I feel really clear because I'm doing my work. Like I'm open to the idea that maybe subconsciously I'm being that way, but when I check in, like, that's not how where I'm coming from is here, not here. And so we can address that fairly, a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Like that's not where I'm at. And we don't have to it doesn't necessarily mean we flip it and put it on the other person.
Yeah, because sometimes it could be true, where they could say something and you check in, like, that's right.
Yeah, it's like, oh, you're right.
Yeah.
That is true. And let me take some breaths. Let me get underneath that. Let me change where I'm coming from so that we can meet at a better level. But we have to know who we are. It's that, who am I? Where do I begin? Where do I end? And then where does everybody else begin? And when we don't know this part, that boundary of who we are easily influenced by others, whether other people are doing it in malice or not, right? Like, we're just easily swayed by the crowd. And that's definitely an area in which if everybody did it my way, life the world would look a lot differently.
I appreciate the circle back with that. That's funny. Oh man,
because that's our politics, that's our culture, that's our relationships.
Right. That's really helpful. It's like we're ingrained in that, and that's the way we are. But for me, it was really interesting to hear, like, there's this other way that's happening. At the same time, it's the same universe that's like making that happen. It's the same experience. Like, for me, that was actually really helpful to hear. Something that I can hold on to when I find myself telling stories internally, like, well, what do you think? Like, that kind of things. Beautiful. I think we should introduce ourselves.
Okay.
How do you introduce yourself?
Ooh.
I also thought about a practice of me introducing you, but we'll take it how you want to take it.
I find this question very difficult. Because the story of me is over 51 years old at this point.
Let me know if you want me to back off here, but I think this is the part that I'll try to get into, like, not so serious stuff, but just fun stuff. I'll just start with, like, how our paths crossed. I think that's a beautiful, like, story. I really think that. This is 2024 today, right now, and so this was 2022. So 2 years ago, I was in Gatesville, Florida, and the decision to come to Austin was made probably in June or July of 2022. Come to find out, I think that you started doing your classes, the movement classes, right around the same time.
Very much.
Here in Austin at Austin Bouldering Project. Anyways, so that's the decision. It was like, me and my partner were like, we should move like fairly quickly, and come to find out, in 2 months we were in Austin. We had moved, we're in Austin. And fast forward, in January of 2023 is when I joined the gym, and I had learned about movement practice. That could mean so many things, and I had my own version of so many things, because I had heard about movement practice from Ido Portal, and that's one of the first things that I actually said that to you about after the class. And I remember you saying, like, man, I don't really mess with what he teaches, so to speak. But anyway, so that's January of 2023 is when I went to your first, like, movement class, and I just found it very, very. I found my curiosity, the language of curiosity, be intrigued without me consciously knowing about it. There was a force that was telling me, this is fascinating and I want to come to this more. Because I had actually explored at that time different movement classes at the same gym as well. I was like, this is the one that is speaking to me and I want to show up to this. Even though it's on Monday at 4 o'clock, and then time goes on and I still hadn't committed to like coming like consciously where like this is a non-negotiable, I have to do this. And, life experiences, the universe, and actually showed me that that's the most important thing for me. And so that it eventually got to a point where that's the class that's a non-negotiable that I attend no matter what. Yeah.
I'll go with the same time frame. A little back, I've been in the movement industry now going on 26 years. I think maybe going into my 27th year. So dating back to like 1998. Really longer than that because I was an athlete before that, but that's when I stepped into being a professional. So around 2022, we're literally coming out of COVID. And COVID was a really amazing time for me. I'm a natural introvert, so it was, I know it was rough on the plane in general, but my experience was a gift for me personally because it put me in a place of being more introspective, and out of that, I base all my decisions on guidance. So I do a lot of breath, meditation, journaling, and my guidance directed me towards it's time to teach a class live, which is, was really uncomfortable because it's not, even though I do the things that I do, that I'm a really lazy creature. So the things that require me to work are not the things that I necessarily want to do. Mm-hmm. But when I'm directed to do them, it's like, well,
we're talking about hard work being work.
Right.
It's kind of
like
like
work
that.
Being work. Yeah. And so I was told to teach a class, and I was told to pick a time that was a terrible time for everybody. Mm-hmm. Needed to be convenient for me. I think my first class I started on Sundays, and I only did that for a few months, and it just didn't work. It wasn't a good time for me. And so I literally picked, I wanted the worst time that I possibly could, 4:00 on a Monday, because that's going to be a time that's really hard for people to get to. And I was told the reason for that is if you pick a tough time, you're going to have small class. And if you're able to build a decent number of people who are coming regularly at a difficult time, then that's going to be a good signal that what you're teaching is good. Yeah. That you're teaching something worth teaching. Because it's easy to fill a class at 6 p.m. at that gym. If you go to the 6 p.m. class, it doesn't matter if you're like, nobody really cares who the instructor is. They're going because it's 6 p.m. and it's class.
It's convenient.
So that was my reasoning for picking that time. And it's still slow. Like, the last few weeks, it's only been 3 people. Like generally when we get into the regular part of the year, we had up to 8 to 10 people fairly regularly. And hopefully it'll get back to that once we get into the new year again. And maybe we'll slowly bring in 1 or 2 more people over the year.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was my
timeline.
My side timeline on coming into that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's magic. It can't be described in other ways of the paths crossing that way, because the odds of just me walking into a random like moment class, I think that also brings up the concept of adjacent possibilities. That's been just very fascinating to me, is just this idea of exploring the next thing. And so that's cool. Like you can go and like say hi to the next door neighbor, but at the same time, it's the idea of you having to be in a place or time or an opportunity that allows that next thing to happen. And so that still requires an active part on us. And that's really important. Just life doesn't just knock on your door and gives you stuff. There's a lot of things that the universe offers to you, but it's a symbiotic relationship. It's not a top-down approach. And I think that's the beauty of life as an experience.
I'd say the universe offers us everything. The problem that we generally have is we only want the things that are comfortable.
It's good for you.
Well, it'll come.
Anyway, Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because comfort's not necessarily good
Mm-hmm.
for you.
No, I meant like
Yeah.
Totally.
No, we're human beings. We're comfort-seeking creatures. Like that is inherently the case with virtually all humans. So the universe will give us everything, and sometimes the things that we need the most are the most uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But because we're comfort-seeking creatures, we tend to not see those things and miss out on those opportunities.
Yeah.
The opportunities that exist within them. So, just to kind of touch on that a little bit, I was finding it right before coming in here. Dealing with, let's say emotional baggage, a deep history of pain, victimhood stories, and neurology in which those stories are really well formed. And those stories were coming up today. And so she was having big feelings. And one of the things that I instructed her to do was to take deep breaths and allow herself to feel it and to get comfortable with the uncomfortable nature of those feelings. Because those feelings, they're not bad. They're valid, and they're not going anywhere. No matter what kind of letting go you do, you're going to continue to experience those feelings. Those feelings will be around. So the more comfortable you get with the discomfort of them means that when they come up, you can notice them earlier.
Yeah.
Because when they come up, they start as a chemical flood going into your bloodstream, and eventually they move to your brain and they start spinning stories. And when they spin stories, they start, in fact, impacting how you talk to people and the decisions that you make. And at that point, it's like a wrecking ball going through your life and just destroying things.
Mm-hmm.
And the more comfortable you are with the discomfort of those feelings, the earlier you catch that bubbling up when they get triggered. And the sooner you can do your breath work and work to get neutral, so that you're not getting to this next level where you have wrecking balls moving through your life.
Yeah.
And that difference is the difference in outcomes. Do I say the wrong thing? Do I destroy my relationships because I'm in this story?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I able to let those stories go, feel the feels, like they're not going to go away, but I can maintain some level of equilibrium.
Yeah.
And from there, the things that I say and the actions that I do will lead me down a different path.
I think there is this has been good conversation. I think this was a great exploration of the pyramid systems that we talked about. There's a lot of different things that we hinted at, and I think I'd love to pick back up in the next episode with the concept of who I am. I think that would be a great one to talk about in that next one.
All right. Sounds good.
Yeah. Thank you.
My pleasure.
For sure.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Hey, you made it all the way through the episode. Thank you for being here. I hope that you were able to walk away from this and take away something from this conversation. If you really enjoyed this, please share this with your friends, like, comment, and subscribe. We'll see you next month. Thanks.